Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, I'll tell you why the Timberwolves are on the right track with their Game 4 performance, a couple of adjustments that should carry into Game 5, why the Wolves have a legit shot to take this series back to Dallas for Game 6 this weekend. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Happy Thursday, everybody. Happy game day. Happy Game 5 tonight back at Target Center, 7:30 tip. And, of course, Kendrick Perkins saying on TV today or Wednesday that that Kevin Garnett might be in the building Thursday night. Who knows? I've seen those rumors floating around online too. The Wolves have a real shot at pushing this thing to a Game 6. Of course, they've lost 3 of the last 4 playoff games, including the first 2 games of this series at home. So, 3 of their last 4 playoff games at home, I should say, is what I meant to say. So, them playing at home is far from a lock, obviously. But I want to get into today some of the different things that they did in Game 4, which we talked about on the post-game pod Wednesday, that I think should and will carry forward into Game 5, and a couple of other kind of like we mentioned statistical anomalies on the show the other day. There's been some of those in this series. I want to talk a little bit about some potential Dallas regression to the mean here in a couple of areas. So we'll get to all that today on the show. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, no matter where you listen to podcasts. That includes YouTube, of course. You can also follow or you can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. Just subscribe to that on Roku or Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow the show on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Also a reminder, following the game tonight, there is a postcast, a live postcast on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. And if you miss it live, you can also listen to the audio after the fact right here on the Locked On Wolves audio feed. So wherever you listen to podcasts, you'll find that later. And if you can't watch the game live, you can listen on the SXM app on Sirius XM. You can check out our guy Alan Horton on the Hometown Call. Again, the Sirius XM app, the SXM app on Sirius XM. Just search Minnesota Timberwolves and you'll find the game. All right, lots to get to here today, and let's start with the. Well, actually, let's start with a half step backward on some bigger picture stuff, which is what I did Wednesday, but I want to do it again here. I think that's important. The Timberwolves for the series have seen an increased success being more aggressive in pick and roll for Dallas. And I want to give kind of like my quick soapbox on why I'm tired of hearing about people complain about, by people, I mean the announcers on TV and people on the internet, of course, because who else is complaining except for those groups of people about the way that the Timberwolves are defending pick and rolls against Luka and Kyrie. Despite what people want to focus on, this series is one that's been decided by a total of, what's been the average margin of victory? The Wolves lost by 3, they lost by 1, they lost by 9, then they won by 5. So these are all single-digit games. They've all come down to the last couple of minutes. Quick math would tell me that they are a minus 8 for the series. So this is 4 games decided by 8 points total. So it's a close series. That right there tells you they're doing something right defensively. Luka's been incredible for 3 of the 4 games, and Kyrie's been really good as well for stretches. How the Wolves are defending, all they've done differently is they've become a little bit more aggressive. They are blitzing, or they're showing a bit more often, at least. Cat was showing a bit more in pick and roll. He had been blitzing earlier in the series. Rudy, even on basically on the wings, if it's not at the top of the circle, he's being more aggressive in pick and roll. If it's in the middle, he's still in drop. And I support that as long as he doesn't drop too far. We've talked about that before. If he can be within the point where he can touch Luka, if he can reach out and touch Luka or Kyrie, that's where you want to be in the drop. You don't want to drop too far. I know that the Wolves defense is designed to give up some of these mid-range shots, but I've said, going back to when they ran drop back in the Ryan Saunders days. I know that they ended up being a little bit more aggressive at times. And then obviously year one of Chris Finch, they were aggressive all the time in pick and roll. They always tried to trap on the perimeter. They abandoned drop completely. But back when Cat was always in drop, when David Vanterpool was coordinating the defense, they gave up 40-point games to Kyrie Irving and D'Angelo Russell and these point guards who like to shoot elbow jumpers. That happened. I think it was Brooklyn Kyrie and Golden State D'Lo. Like, those were the types of teams the Wolves were giving this stuff up to. You can't play like that against Kyrie Irving, or he's going to score 40, or Luka's going to score 50. They need to be a little bit more aggressive in the drop, and I think they are. I think they've started to make that adjustment. And again, by that I mean in arm's length. They should be able to reach out and touch Luka or Kyrie. You can't drop all the way back to the hash line in the middle of the paint. Like that isn't conducive to winning if you're playing this team. And I think that they've done a good job of kind of tweaking that. Yes, they've given up some more corner threes, and this is actually skips a little bit down to my second point there on the graphic on YouTube. Some potential Dallas regression. I want to talk about this is related to the defensive effort too. Corner threes. I mean, Dallas is shooting more corner threes than they did in the regular season, but they're not making, but they're making way more, and it's crazy. Let's see. The actual stat is, in the playoffs to this point, Dallas has been number one out of all playoff teams in corner three-point frequency. Over 13% of their three-point attempts, or excuse me, of their shot attempts in the playoffs are coming from the corner. Over 13% of their shot attempts in this playoffs are coming from the corner. Now, in the regular season, they also shot a bunch of corner threes. They were still number one, so that's not unusual. It was 12%. So they're still shooting a higher percentage of their shots from the corners, but they've been number one in the playoffs and in the regular season. The difference is, in the regular season, Dallas was only 36.5% on corner threes. It was 28th in the league. We talked about this in the preview show last week. They were number one in frequency from the corners and 28th in make percentage from the corners. Now, part of this is due to improved personnel. Certainly, PJ Washington is a better corner three-point shooter than the guys that were shooting corner threes back in December for this team. There's no question. But, and I guess what I could do is I could isolate, let's see if I can do this quickly. If I could isolate the, basically since the trade deadline, I should be able to do that really quickly on Cleaning the Glass. But like, as I'm talking this out, I'm realizing like, hey, let's go since March 1st, accuracy on corner threes. Let's see where Dallas is. Still really low, still 27th in the league in corner three-point percentage accuracy. Their percentage of makes since March 1st, they're 27th in the league, 32.8%. For the season, they were 28th in the league, 36.5%. So, all that to say, Dallas is a poor corner three-point shooter. However, in the playoffs, their accuracy has improved to 40% in the playoffs on corner threes. So they've seen a massive increase. Again, they're like 36%. 36% for the regular season, 33% since March 1st, and they're 40% in the playoffs on corner three-point shooting. That is and now that's fifth. It's actually one spot below Minnesota, but that also includes a bunch of teams that got knocked out right away. So small sample, right? Like obviously it knocks out Golden State, who played one game, Sacramento, who played one game, Philadelphia, who played one series. And then it's the Wolves, and then it's Dallas. So you could, if you knock out the play-in and first-round exit teams, Minnesota's 1 and Dallas is 2 in quarter three-point accuracy. But Dallas remains number 1 in frequency. So couple things for this. Number one, the way that teams defend Luka and Kyrie, certainly the way OKC defended them, and similar to how the Wolves are defending them, it generates some of these open looks from three. And the Wolves' bet is we would rather give up a semi-contested mid-range jumper to anybody, even if it is Luka or Kyrie, than a wide-open three-pointer. But if we could semi-contest both and at least make these guys think, make a tough pass, make that Luka pass to the corner difficult instead of just an easy walk in the park pass, then we can contest that corner three and make it more challenging. And sure enough, we've seen PJ Washington have difficult shooting games in this series to this point. So I want to dig in a bit more on that and some of those numbers and the games we've seen from these ancillary players for Dallas before getting into a couple other things today. I want to talk a little bit about Rudy. I want to talk a little bit about the defense more broadly here. We'll get to all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Of course, massive game tonight. We'll talk about those odds here in a second. That's $150 in bonus bets that they'll give you with any winning $5 bet. $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more tonight. The Timberwolves are actually favored by 4.5 at home against Dallas. I believe game one, the line was 2 or 2.5. So this is a more significant spread in favor of Minnesota. The money line is minus 194 for Minnesota in this game. For the series, the Western Conference Finals overall, the Wolves are now plus 420. I can't recall what it was before game 4. But of course, nobody's come back from an 0-3 deficit in an NBA playoff series in a game 7 series or a 7-game series. So plus 420 for the series. Again, minus 4.5 tonight for Minnesota. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so we're talking quarter threes. We talked about how P.J. Washington killed it against OKC. That hasn't necessarily been the case against Minnesota. However, we've seen Derrick Jones Jr. shoot the lights out, which is, we'll say, unexpected. Game 1, which was the game that the Wolves really should have won, and there's a couple of those mixed in there. P.J. was 2 of 8 from three-point range. Derrick Jones Jr. was 0 of 2. And these are the two I'm going to highlight because those are the two that are getting the most attempts. There's been a few Josh Green attempts mixed in there, a little bit of Jaden Hardy. But those are the two guys to highlight the most. So they were 2 of 10 combined in game 1. Game 2, which was the game with the Nas in and out 3-point attempt, and another game that the Wolves definitely could have and probably should have won. P.J. Washington and Derrick Jones Jr. combined to go 0 of 7. Now, they did get 3 of 4 off the bench from Josh Green and Jaden Hardy. But the primary guys in the starting lineup who are generating open looks off of Kyrie and Luka were 0 of 7. And the Wolves did not take advantage of that. Game 3 in Dallas, which was the least close game, but still one the Wolves were in, that saw P.J. Washington go 2 of 6 and Derrick Jones Jr. go 3 of 3. Also, Josh Green and Jaden Hardy combined for 1 of 2 off the bench. So P.J. and DJJ combined to go 5 of 9 in that game. And Dallas ends up with a 9-point win. This last time around, Minnesota hangs on to win at the end. Those guys combined, Washington and Derrick Jones Jr. combined to go 4 of 12 from outside the arc, which, of course, the Wolves will take. Now, Jaden Hardy went nuts in the second half of this one. You also had a Dante Exum 3, you had a Josh Green 3. So those guys combined to go 5 of 9 from outside the arc off the bench, which you wouldn't expect. But Kleba came back and was just 0 of 2 outside the arc and clearly was not prepared to be shooting threes in this game. So the Timberwolves, they I think would be fine to treat Kleba more like a decoy, at least until he makes a 3-pointer here in game 5, because he just didn't look comfortable. He looked hesitant. And he was out there. It again felt like more of a decoy situation than anything else. So we'll see how the Wolves treat that here in game 5. But that's what I would do. So all that to say, the Timberwolves are allowing Dallas to shoot, not entirely. You don't want to allow them to shoot the open threes, but going back to what I was saying last segment, if you could force Luka or Kyrie to make that tough pass to the corner or make that pass a little bit tougher and then still get off a good contest, which is one of the reasons why I picked the Wolves in this series, is I thought they had the personnel and the defensive, we'll call it stick-to-itiveness, to contest some of those 3-point shots that maybe OKC allowed to be more wide open, because Minnesota's just got a little bit more length, a little bit more overall defensive tenacity to contest some of those, to actually get out on the perimeter and get a hand in the face. And for the most part, that's been true. For the most part, that's been true in this series. And Dallas has so much of that production has been Luke and Kyrie. But again, I come back to every one of these games has been close down the stretch. So, well, you might have, Luka scored 30 plus in the first 3 games of the series. He had 28 in the Wolves win, but it took him 21 shots to get there. Kyrie's been really good, except for game 4. He was 30 plus in 2 of the first 3 games. But that's the formula for Minnesota. You're not going to shut these guys down. What you have to do is try and make them turn it over, which they have. Try and make them make difficult shots, which they've done, and force them to make these difficult passes to subpar shooters, or at least shooters that you'd rather have a contested PJ Washington or Derrick Jones Jr. 3 than a mostly open 2 from Kyrie or Luka. You just would. That's how the math works out. Now, Dallas is trying to do the same thing effectively to Minnesota, right? It's forcing the ball out of Ant's hands and making Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker shoot the ball. But for the playoffs, or even in the regular season, I mean, Jaden obviously didn't shoot the ball as well this year, but we know Nickeil Alexander-Walker can hit those shots, and he did it in the first series against Phoenix, especially, and for stretches against Denver. So they're trying to do similar things here. The difference is Ant is more than happy to get all the way to the rim and isn't just going to stop in the mid-range. Luka and Kyrie, especially Luka, are far more comfortable to, stop near the elbow and shoot a contested jumper or whatever. And Minnesota knows that. And there's the layer of Rudy as rim protection for, baseline cutters, etc. One of the reasons why he's in drop instead of playing up is that at least he could provide a semblance of defense for the paint. And related to that, points in the paint last game, Minnesota was a +10. They finally did a good job of protecting the paint after getting, crushed in the paint the couple of games prior, and, all the jokes about Rudy, etc. But there's more to it than that. This last game, Minnesota had 50 points in the paint to Dallas's 40 in game 4, and that's huge. That's big for Minnesota to show that they can do that. Going back a couple of games, the game that they lost by 9, Minnesota lost the paint battle by 12 points. They lost the paint battle by 12 points. Now, Derek Lively being out impacted that on the other end of the floor. We did see Daniel Gafford come up with a couple of big blocks actually for the series, Daniel Gafford's been great. He had a 5-block game. I think it was game 2. But this last game, he had 3, and a couple of them were really impressive. But that's fine. Like, you're going to get your shot blocked if you live in the paint. And Ant did a much better job of attacking in this game. And that was a big reason for the increase in, or I guess Dallas didn't increase their block shots, but for those Gafford blocks and for, those potential defensive highlights. But if you're getting into the paint, you're going to win the battle. If you're going to consistently get into the paint and force the issue, if you're Anthony Edwards and the Wolves, and we saw that. A couple more things I want to get to here in terms of overall, series thoughts. I want to talk a bit more about Gobert, and I'll close with kind of summarizing everything we've talked about and giving basically my 3 keys to the Wolves winning game 4 and forcing game 6 back in Dallas. Also give my prediction here too for game 4, what I think will happen. So we'll do all that here next. Okay. Let's talk quickly about Rudy. There's still a lot of Rudy conversation, discourse, etc., because there always will be, no matter what. The Wolves could win the title and people will still discredit Rudy's contribution, which is, of course, absurd. But so far in the playoffs, the Wolves are, as we know, a massive plus with Rudy on the court. With him on the court, their overall, their net rating is a 21, is a +21. Gobert, I should say Gobert's net ratings. They're +13 with him on the court. They're a -8 with him off the court. I don't know how else to describe this to people that don't like Rudy Gobert, but that is a much better team with Rudy on the court than with Rudy off the court. Against Dallas, their net rating is a +26 with Rudy on the court. Their defensive rating is 25 points worse against Dallas with Gobert off the court. Turns out Luka and Kyrie are really good. They're going to make shots. And it's on the Wolves for putting Rudy in isolation. I shouldn't say in isolation. Well, yeah, for putting him on an island, being isolated against by Luka or Kyrie on the perimeter. Now, to their credit, it hasn't happened a ton since game 2, but of course, game 2 is the one that got all the play when Luka scored over Rudy. And as I pointed out before, the possession before that, Rudy stopped Luka. And, last game, I talked about this a little bit on the post-game pod, but nobody's going to talk about the defense Rudy played down the stretch as Luka failed to score and turn the ball over and miss shots. But those aren't going to hit. Those aren't concise pretty highlights. We saw a few of them in the regular season because Gobert can turn those in. Like he can put together a nice little clip where he's dominant defensively. We saw, that first OKC game, way back in like November or whatever, when he blocked Chet twice in the same play, was contesting the perimeter, recovery to the rim. Rudy can do that stuff, and he does do that stuff. But so many of these possessions are never minds from other teams where Rudy's too close and they back it out. Those aren't gonna make the highlight reel. But you know what? Those possessions that force a shot clock violation or a late clock forced, contested mid-range shot, those are every bit as impactful. And they cancel out the times when he gets put on an island and beat off the dribble. Show me a center in the league, maybe Wembanyama, who can guard Luka on an island. Luka's going to win a good chunk of the time. I mean, he wins a good chunk of the time against Jaden McDaniels, who's second team all defense, or he could win. I'm sure we could find Luka cooking Drew Holiday somewhere. I'm sure it's happened. The point is, Rudy's impact on the overall defense, and I've tried to avoid getting on the soapbox too much, so I'm keeping this short, but I could do a whole show on this. Rudy's impact defensively on just keep paint deterrence, rim deterrence. We've talked about that so much on the show this year. Rim deterrence is such a big thing. Dallas doesn't even like to shoot the ball at the rim in the first place, which is why the paint issues in this series, save for game 5, game 4, have been so frustrating. In the regular season, Dallas was 29th in rim attempts. Only 18.5% of their shots come at the rim. 12% of their shot attempts come from the corner threes. Only 18.5% come at the rim. They're shooting the ball from the corners nearly as much as they're shooting rim attempts. But when they get to the rim, Dallas is good because it's Kyrie finishing at the rim primarily, and it's offensive putbacks. Though that's how Dallas scores at the rim. But the Wolves sealing off the defensive glass and Rudy's paint deterrence for guys like Kyrie and to a lesser extent Luka and other players who may want to get to the rim, which there's not very many on Dallas, Jaden Hardy. The fact, like, lobs are a big part of it too, right? And Dallas had plenty of lobs in the series, but Rudy's presence deters rim attempts, deters paint attempts, period. And that is a big deal. That plays into the whole defensive calculus much more than one possession on the perimeter of Luka versus Kyrie. As much fun as it is for NBA Twitter to make fun. The other thing is rebounding wise. With Rudy on the court, Dallas's offensive rebound rate is palatable. It's actually worse than Minnesota's. But with Rudy off the court, Dallas is grabbing offensive rebounds at a crazy rate. It's like 35% or something like that. Which you look at the playoffs overall. I'll pull this up real quick. Yeah, playoffs overall. See if I can pull up offensive rebound rate here real quick. Let's see. Offensive rebound rate in the playoffs. League average in the playoffs is 27%. Or I should say playoff average, playoff team average. The Wolves are 29%. Dallas is just a shade under 30%. But when Rudy's off the floor, Dallas's offensive rebound rate is like 35%. And again, Rudy's presence. Yeah, occasionally they'll get a rebound over, around, through Rudy Gobert. That happens. But when he's off the floor, they're getting way too many rebounds. So all that to say, Rudy's impact has been massive, and it's easy for that to get lost. For game 5, I look for the Wolves to continue to mix their coverages in pick and roll. I love what they did in game 4, as we've talked about. Blitzing on the wings, essentially. Cat showing or blitzing, like a full blitz. Rudy dropping, as long as he doesn't drop too far. The backside rotation just has to be there, whether it's the low man help and then also contesting in the corners. Like we saw occasionally, it was Mike Conley on Derek Jones Jr. Like he's got to get out there and contest. And that's the advantage when Conley's off the floor for having Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Kyle Anderson both on the floor, when they have this massive lineup where everybody's 6'5" and taller, 6'6" and taller. That length, this is another area where length comes in that doesn't get talked about much, is contesting three-pointers. Because if you're a half step slower, but your arm, and that's one of the reasons why Mike Conley, even though he's only like, 6'3", he's got length. But if you have him off the floor and you have Nickeil Alexander-Walker on the floor, there's even more length, more height, more wingspan there. You could get off better contests on Derek Jones Jr., PJ Washington, Jaden Hardy, whoever it is. and recover to those corners because you've packed the paint to try and deter Luka. So all that to say, forcing those contested corner threes is a good thing for Minnesota. They're going to make some, but again, they were bottom 3 in the NBA this season, bottom 4 since March 1st on corner 3-point accuracy. They shoot a bunch of them. They don't make that many. And these are all close games. So you force a couple of those misses versus a Luka semi-open, 12-footer, fine. Now, obviously, you don't want Luka to get a wide-open 12-footer, which is why you can't drop too far. So I look for more of that. I also look for Ant to continue being aggressive. Him getting downhill, and as much as I got tired of Reggie Miller talking about him getting 2 feet in the paint, I mean, he's right. Like, the more the more Ant gets into the paint, the more it opens up the rest of the Wolves offense, whether that's catch and shoot threes from Cat, who now hopefully has some confidence back, or it's, corner threes from Jaden or Na, or, I guess those would be the 2 primary guys shooting corner threes, Mike Conley. But Ant getting into the paint, driving seams, being aggressive, getting off the ball early so that he gets the ball back and can drive a seam, that's huge for Minnesota. There were a couple instances of him reloading last game and seeing like, hey, if I drive this seam, they're going to help off of Cat, and Cat's going to get open. In fact, that late contested 3 that Cat made kind of right in front of the Wolves bench and Mike Nori, it was contested because I think the spacing was still a little bit wonky, but Ant intentionally drove that seam to pull the double off of Cat, the help off of Cat, to give Cat a semi-open, ended up being semi-contested 3-point attempt when Cat was going really hot. Like, I think he'd made his first 3 or 4 threes, and that was the next one. And that was the right play by Anthony Edwards. So stuff like that the decision-making has improved again. We just needs to stay here. It's got to stay in a good spot, and they've got to continue being aggressive offensively, driving those seams to generate those open 3-point looks. Those are my 2 biggest things for this game. I guess my third thing would be, it should kind of go without saying, but we got to bring it back up. Turnovers. Turnover rate in the regular season, Dallas, actually, as much as turnovers can be an issue for them, they were top 5 in avoiding turnovers in the regular season. They had a turnover rate of just 12.6%, whereas Minnesota improved toward the end of the season, but was still 23rd in the league, 14.5%. In this series, that's been a factor. In game 1, Minnesota won the turnover battle. They were a +3, and they also, remember, completely outshot. They made 18 threes. Dallas made 6 in game 1, and somehow the Wolves lost. Back to an anomaly, which is the Wolves winning the 3-point battle by 12 threes. So 36 points outside the arc and winning the turnover battle by 3, but losing the game. That was weird. Game 2, Dallas also turned it over 1 more time than Minnesota. Minnesota only had 9 turnovers. Game 3, Dallas turned it over 4 more times than Minnesota, and the Wolves lost. Game 4, Minnesota turned it over 1 more time than Dallas. So weirdly enough, the only game that the Wolves had more turnovers than Dallas is the game that they won. Now, it's been close all series, but the points off turnovers, which again wasn't all transition. A lot of it was just, dead ball, side out of bounds, offensive foul on Cat, and then Dallas goes down and scores on the next possession. So that matters. But I don't want to blame this all on transition defense, because the fast break points were actually in Minnesota's favor. This was just, they turned the ball over way too often, so Dallas got these free possessions and scored 2 points per possession. I think they had 30 points off 14 or 15 Minnesota turnovers. Just crazy. And another anomaly to an extent, but just don't turn it over that much. Get back to the 9 or 10 turnovers a game like earlier in the series, and they should be okay. I really do think Minnesota wins this game. I think they push it to a game 6 on Saturday in Dallas, and then, of course, it's a whole other reset. It's one game at a time. As cliche as that sounds, it legitimately is that. Every game is the Super Bowl, to borrow Kyrie's phrase, that every game is the Wolves Super Bowl now, is what he said he said before game 4. This is the Wolves Super Bowl. This is just another game for us, which explains maybe a little bit of what happened at Dallas. But it is. I mean, this is the biggest game of all of their lives. And if the Wolves can win this one and force a game 6 in Dallas, I may start to feel bold about predicting this series and predicting history, but you got to take care of this game. And for as bad as the Wolves have played, they're a Naz Reid buzzer beater rimming out. They're a Luka ridiculous shot over Rudy Gobert. Whatever happened toward the end of game 3 that I'm blanking on. Like, you go back through each of these games, and this is how playoff basketball works, right? But all these series have been close. It's different than the Denver series. This series could easily be 2-2. It could be 3-1 Wolves with how close some of these games have been. So if they continue to mix up their pick and roll coverage on Luka or Kyrie, they take care of the basketball themselves, and Ant continues to be aggressive, they'll win this game. And I know Luka and Kyrie both didn't shoot the ball well in game 4, they're probably each going to have another game like this at some point in the series. And, that could factor in too. The Wolves could mess a bunch of stuff up like they did in game 4. But if Luka goes 7 for 21 again, the Wolves will probably win. So as great as Luka is, guys can have bad games. And the Wolves need to hope that happens to Luka and or Kyrie at least 1 or 2 more times in the series if they're going to have a shot to pull off the seemingly impossible and win this series. So I think the Wolves will win Thursday. I don't have a great gut feel, and if it's going to be a close game, and it probably will be because they all have been. I don't know that I would touch the Wolves minus 4.5 on FanDuel we talked about, but I think the Wolves will win. I'd consider Wolves money line, honestly. But all that to say, we'll do the post-game pod live on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube following the game. Have the audio here on Locked On Wolves, and of course, I'll be back on Friday with the post-game pod. Win or lose, we'll talk about the game. If there is a Game 6 to preview, we'll talk about that Friday as well, ahead of Game 6 on Saturday night, which would be back in Dallas if the Wolves win on Thursday. So all that is upcoming. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app, on Roku and Amazon Fire TV, and you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.